Samantha, welcome to This Is Horror.
Thanks so much for having me. This is horror. We're here in it.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And goodness, I mean, that could spur a entire discussion in and of itself. I mean, all the horror in the world today, all the horror that one can find just by, looking in the newspaper or possibly opening the door, depending on where you're living. But instead of starting with horror, although this might start with horror, it will depend how you'll answer this question. But I want to know what some of the early life lessons were that you learned growing up. And they don't have to pertain to writing, it can just be anything that was instrumental in those formative years.
Oh goodness. So I was raised Mormon, and I'm now, an out queer trans woman. So that was like quite the journey to go from Mormonism, which has, I'd say it's fair to say, anti-LGBTQ doctrine. It teaches that gender is assigned to you premortally and is inalterable. Um, yeah, to go from that to who I am now, quite the journey. But I would say, like, early life lessons that I still kind of keep rattling around in the brain from those days are working hard. Mormonism is a Calvinist tradition. It's all about that American Reformationist ethic. For better, for worse, that's ingrained in me. And I think the power of words. I was reading the King James Bible as a kid, like around the same age that I was flipping through like the gingerbread man, like you're going to church on Sunday and you're hearing this very like majestic English, and you're learning to read at the same time, and it's all kind of going in there. And there was something entrancing to me about language and its rhythm and its power. And obviously in Mormonism I kind of disagree with how the power of language is used, and it took me a while to kind of come around to realizing, like, hey, I can use words for good things, um, instead of making feel people feel restricted and confined. So yeah, I think it's some, that Calvinist work ethic and kind of an addiction to language, I guess.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, having left the Mormon church for very obvious reasons, one thing that I'm interested in is what your relationship with spirituality and God and religion is to these days. Because I mean, I know that, growing up in a religious household myself, that it can be difficult to shift some of that mentality entirely. And so I'm wondering what your relationship is pertaining to spirituality and religion.
Yeah, it is difficult. It's like falling off an existential cliff, like everything that you were told about the world when you come of age often is when, people tend to lose their faith, I've found. And you kind of realize, wait, everything I've been told is like wrong or intentionally misleading, or maybe not intentionally misleading. Maybe the people who told me that actually believed it. And yeah, it's like a real matrix moment for sure. My relationship now, I would say, like, immediately after I left, I felt like a pretty hardened, dyed in the wool atheist. And as I get older, I'm just kind of like, well, why bother even investing the psychic energy in denying something when I can just be like, I don't know, we're all just weird, squishy meat sacks on a rock. Like, if something happened after, I wouldn't object. It would, I hope, be better than being, a decaying pile of flesh on a on a planet. But yeah, I'm not particularly invested in that possibility either. I would say I live my life as though there's nothing after, but not in like a carpe diem, I'm going skydiving kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that sounds like a very sensible way to approach things. And I mean, it sounds like kind of similar to the conclusions that I've come up with. I feel a lot of us, when we go away from the church to begin with, probably because we're so bloody angry about all the, bullshit, to put it bluntly, we do go this more kind of militant atheist route. But then as I've got a little bit older, it's like, I don't know what the truth is. I don't know what's out there. It would probably be pretty arrogant to say that I did, but I like the idea, as you do too, of perhaps there being more to this, but I'm not sure there's the scientific evidence to support that. It's more just something that would be quite nice. But there are a lot of ideas that would be nice that don't necessarily manifest in reality.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like, what bothered me about Mormonism was the epistemic arrogance. It was like, only we know the truth. Like, on a planet of billions of people, only like 12 million people living in the Rocky Mountain west of the United States, like, know what God wants for humanity. I was like, that seems pretty arrogant. And yeah, I kind of became more reluctant to like just mirror that arrogance on the other side and just be like, whatever. At least
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of your first experiences with stories, both reading and writing, I mean, I understand that, as early as elementary school, you were writing silly poems and then graduated to demotivational posters in junior high school. So let's talk a little bit about those early experiences with writing.
Oh my goodness, the research goes deep. I mean, I can't remember which book I even mentioned that in, but yeah, I've made like a poster that said something like, shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you'll like suffocate in the never ending nothingness of space or something like that. Yeah, and I had little like pocket notebooks in elementary school, just jotting down stuff that I would be terribly ashamed to look at now because you're 5 years old and you don't have like a prefrontal lobe yet or whatever. I'm not sure about brain physiology, but yeah, you know I think there was a weird, almost totemic quality to books to me as a kid. I loved like holding them in my hands. I'm sure that comes from Mormonism too. Like, you're holding the Bible, you're holding the Book of Mormon, and it's this object that people are investing so much energy and meaning into. And I think, like, more than anything, like, I wanted to make one of those objects, and it was almost coincidental that what had to go into it was words. I was like, I sure would like to make one of these things that people carry around. But yeah, I read a lot early and like, independently, and then in grade school I started inhaling science fiction. It's weird for Dune to be in the box office now and not to be something that I'm sheepishly reading on the back of the bus while like the popular kids talk about what they're going to do this weekend. So yeah, I mean, for me, the trajectory was the King James Bible to Frank Herbert, to Variety.
And that is quite the trajectory. I think from the King James Bible to like outlandish science fiction, there are some connections and perhaps commonalities. And then, well, variety, I it's gonna be more tenuous to try and then make a connection there, but it certainly adds some fun and some spice to the reading material.
Yeah, I mean, largely it's a function of like, I think a lot of people are writing cross genre today, which is really exciting to me, having recently written a cross genre myself and still doing it. Yeah, I like things kind of breaking out of boxes more and not knowing what to expect. So, you know, a lot of what I read lately are like friends books or that kind of thing. And it's just like, oh, I guess I'm going to be reading a romance book now. I'm going to be reading near future drama. It all depends. But yeah.
And I wonder, and I've never asked this question before, but as you were talking, I mean, as somebody who read the Bible a lot, did you learn any lessons in terms of how to write compelling stories and persuasive fiction through studying the Bible?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think I probably spent more time as a kid with the Book of Mormon than I did with like the New Testament, which I read more as I was like a teenager, went on my mission. But yeah, like the Book of Mormon was full of all these like florid like stories with these larger than life characters. I mean, for anyone who's not familiar with the work of Mormon scripture, it sort of posits that there was uh, a group of Israelites who came to the North American continent anciently, predating like Native Americans, and had an entire civilization that was lost to time that Jesus also visited. So, like, some wild stuff without any historical record to back it up, really. And so, Joseph Smith, in my view at least, was just kind of like making all these people up. There were, military generals who were kneeling in front of God and praying for guidance on the battlefield. There were like brave truth tellers standing on the wall, like getting pelted with rocks for trying to spread the gospel to the Lamanites. Like he invented these big characters. But I guess I would say more than anything, like spending time with Mormon scripture, it taught me that like wildly disparate tones can coexist in one text, like if you take it as a whole, it's like Old Testament, God is just like murking people, It's just like smiting left and right. And then you have all of these like tender notes in the New Testament, all of the feet washing and the caring for the poor. And then you have Revelation where you have, I don't know, almost like Lovecraftian, like creatures like destroying creation. I mean, and yet people kind of all refer to it as one thing, it's the Bible. It has everything. And I'm like, well, I think fiction can have a little bit of everything too.
It sounds like if the Book of Mormon was written now, that it would be like fanfic instead of a religion. I mean, it's like this stuff you're talking about. It's crazy.
I
I've
mean,
never read
essentially
it.
it
I've
is
heard
like
of it.
Bible fan fiction. You
Yeah, it pretty much. But I didn't know about the I I grew up Catholic, so that's I know that, and I don't go to church anymore. I'm spiritual, just not religious. Religious comes from man. So I knew you're telling me things about a religion that I knew nothing about, and it's like really fucking me up. So it's like I was like, wow, okay, I didn't know this. This is crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a trip, and like, of course, you look back on it now and you're like, wow, I like believed that God told Joseph Smith he needed to marry like other men's wives, or I believed that Joseph Smith could translate Egyptian before anybody had found the Rosetta Stone, like you believed these things. And then, gosh, I left the church in 2007. So is that what, 15 plus years ago? More? Yeah, I mean, it's all seems sillier to you over time, but like when you're locked in it, it's ironclad in your mind, which is terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. When you're a child and your parents tell you something is true, at that point you have no reason to doubt them. It's quite a revelation, at least it was for me, when it's like, hang on, that just wasn't true at all. Why did they say that to me? And I mean, sometimes I'd even have arguments with teachers because my mother had told me something, so I'd taken it to be true. And then, later in life, it's like, oh, she was wrong. Must have looked a right idiot having that argument. But you don't question it. You don't question your parents for at least a time.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough to grapple with. I mean, I have a good relationship with my folks now, but like you kind of have to think, well, like they needed to tell me that because it was serving some psychic function for
Mm.
them. Like trying to transmit their beliefs to their children was for them like a bulwark against the own uncertainty they feel that leads them to need to shore up their own faith or belief or fear of what comes next, I like I disagree with that. Uh, I also don't have children, and don't want children. Like probably not coincidentally, just because it's just like there's something about transmitting any sort of belief system to another human that feels inherently tyrannical to me now. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, with children, I mean, you will find a way to inadvertently mess them up or teach them something wrong, even with the best will in the world. So, I mean, kind of as a parent, you just have to do what you believe to be best in the moment and apologize later when you realize some of those moments weren't actually for the best. I mean, I don't know how else to do it, but to realize that there is no such thing as perfect parenting, and there is no such thing in my view as perfection anyway. It's like the imperfections that almost paradoxically make us perfect. They're the things that make us special.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that ultimately the place I have to arrive at with it is just you know a lot of people say like if I could go back and do it all over again, would I do it differently? No, like in this brave way. And I'm like, yeah, I probably would, but I didn't and I can't. So I need to appreciate the kind of perspective that like that experience has given me. Like I don't know that my brain would be producing quite the strange kind of stuff it does if I hadn't had the life I did. So I try to like glean aspects out of having this very unusual, like outsider, alienated existence, like growing up closeted in a deeply conservative religion. Like I try to hold on to that, even if I would snap it away in a heartbeat if I had like the Thanos glove or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about the kind of fiction that you write and the fiction that you read, I mean, I understand too that you were watching a lot of slasher movies relatively early. And so, I mean, I want to know about some of the films that you were watching. I'm also interested in terms of whether teachers and your parents and family members and friends were they mostly encouraging and supportive of your love for genre, or was it the opposite? What did that look like?
So Mormonism, at least like devout Mormons, follow this rule: generally avoid rated R movies. So growing up, like my access to horror was Hitchcock. Like, for some reason I was allowed to watch like Psycho, even though to my money, Psycho is like a much more disturbing film than like many much more gory slasher movies. Like it's terrifying on a visceral and almost like grounded level of like the roadside motel, like the stranger with the creepy smile, than a lot of stuff that I could have like snuck in with my friends to see at the theater. So yeah, that was kind of my immediate access, and I loved Hitchcock growing up. Like I loved Rear Window, I love Vertigo, I love Psycho. Um, so yeah, that was my initial exposure, and then as I got older, that changed, of course. But we can talk about that more later. I did make a short film in high school about a serial killer who murders people by shoving them in a dryer. It was a comedy, and I called it Permanent Press. Uh, I think I started with the pun and worked backwards. So yeah, slashing was on the mind. I liked making movies mostly in high school more than jotting in notebooks with a little like camcorder with mini DV tapes. Um, I would say, Mormonism, at least my own family, not super encouraging of the creative impulse. My dad worked a white collar job for decades that, you know, paid for 4 kids to go through school. And I think he always thought like, his kids would kind of follow in that more secure life path. And he sort of gently reminded me that like for everybody who was trying to make it in a creative industry, there were like 99 people who failed or whatever. Not super encouraging to hear. And so, yeah, I think that kind of put me off the idea of ever kind of having a career in the arts. Oop, I will say a career in the arts again, so you can edit me knocking my table and then edit me saying knocking my table.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I think I still have held on to that. I've maintained a day job like editing or doing journalism for virtually all of my writing career for that reason. Don't want to lose that health insurance. But yeah, I didn't get the kind of like carte blanche, like follow your dreams, kid, uh, kind of parenting around, yeah, my creativity.
So, given that there was discouragement regarding the writing, what was the impetus that made you decide you're going to go for it anyway?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I was an economics major, believe it or not, for a time until switching over to linguistics. I think grad school basically gave me the space, and leaving Mormonism gave me the space to kind of pursue more authentic desires and wants personally and professionally. So, I remember I mean, and I was always pretty good at writing. Like I loved writing essays in school. I wrote a thesis in undergrad, and one day my thesis advisor was like, "Great job on this. Now we need to talk about like which PhD programs you're going to apply to." This was a women's and gender studies professor, and I was like, "I'm not going to a PhD program. Like, I'm gonna go get a job." And she was like, "Well, PhD programs pay you to go to school." She didn't tell me that they pay you like almost nothing. She just told me they pay you. And I was like, well, then I'm going to get a PhD, Mary. Like, I get paid to just keep doing this. Um, and kind of the second I got into grad school, I had a little bit of money of my own. I had my own place far from my parents. I had my own health insurance that had trans inclusive, writers on it or whatever the LGBTQ Center had negotiated with Emory. And that just kind of opened a whole world to me. I had free time to do freelance writing, which I started doing, and I could transition, which I did around the same time. So yeah, I mean, basically it was this pragmatic thing of like getting my own autonomy. And then the second I had my own autonomy, like one of the first things I wanted to do was write.
Yeah, and one thing that I said off air is like throughout your writing, whether it is fiction, whether it is non-fiction, there is always just this delightful, dark, comedic thread throughout. Like, I love your sense of humor, and I feel that this must be part of your essence and how you see the world because it just permeates throughout everything.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't sound very funny on this podcast so far talking about all my religious trauma, but I promise, especially, I think it comes out most in my books, honestly, my sense of humor. Um, but yeah, I think you kind of have to have a little bit of a grim, darkly comedic view on the world to have experienced some of the things I experienced. You know, some bit of trauma I haven't mentioned is I had open heart surgery in 2008. That was 4 years before coming out as trans and around the same time as I was leaving the church. So, you know, like when you're born with in the wrong gender with a defective aortic valve in like a religion invented by a treasure hunting teenager in Palmyra, New York, like you've got to have that almost like self-effacing, like God is really like playing a big long trick on me kind of view. And you kind of have to laugh at how cruel the universe can be sometimes. Um, yeah, I wouldn't say I'm like totally nihilistic and joker pilled by it, but I like to flirt with that edge.
Yeah, and I mean, the open heart surgery is, of course, something that you mention in your non-fiction, but I mean, not in so much detail, but I'm wondering, I mean, in terms of that period in your life, I guess, what was the timeline in terms of realizing you need to have this surgery, actually having the surgery, and then what did the recovery look like?
Yeah, this is how messed up it was. I found out that I needed the aortic valve replacement while I was on my Mormon mission. And my first reaction was, I get to go home. Like, I wasn't like, oh, shoot, like my sternum, it needs to get cracked open. I was like, I get to like stop knocking on strangers' doors every day for the next 2 years, trying to persuade them to like join this church. Like by then my faith was kind of slipping anyway. So yeah, I mean, before then I had a heart murmur growing up. I sort of thought I was told the most intensive thing I would need would be an angioplasty, but I guess at some point, like the tricuspid valve, two of the cusps started fusing together, or something like, you know, you can have an infection or you can have stress or something can change that sets it on a different track. And so, yeah, it was a shock to me when I found out that that's what had to happen. But yeah, I think it changed the course of my life, and that, like, you know, that was my entry into my 20s. You know, like I didn't get to feel immortal. I didn't get like a YOLO decade. Like I started out my 20s in a intubated in a hospital room, you know, like so uh that's kind of like a rude awakening. And I think that it only kind of cemented a kind of outsider status I had felt like growing up Mormon in New Jersey, where not very many people are Mormon. So, you know, going from that to being like one of only a handful of people I knew who had had some kind of major health crisis at that early age, like, yeah, I guess contributed to a long term sense of being on the outside looking in, which I think you can see in my fiction as well as the memoir.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too, I mean, obviously, like, leaving any sort of religion can be a traumatic and a difficult experience. Do you remember the first time that you started doubting the truth in Mormonism? And was there a conversation or a person who you first approached and you were like, I don't know if this is true. I'm not sure that that what we've been led to believe is actually real.
Yeah, I mean, the really simple answer is like obviously my gender, which I understood without vocabulary from my earliest memories, was at odds with the religion. So I think, in a sense, that was inevitable. But there's, I suppose, a more interesting answer, and I think it has to do with like going on a mission. You know, I as a kid, I think it's hard to take religion seriously because you're a kid and you're just this like formless ball of id, you know. And I sort of turned to Mormonism, even though I was raised in it, like leaned into it when I was 16 out of, insecurity and loneliness, honestly. And I think what kind of started putting some cracks in it was having that missionary experience. So this was pre-transition, suit and tie, like all the boys knocking on doors, etc. And I remember how militaristic it felt and how that didn't feel spiritual to me. Like I was in the mission field and there's this very regimented hierarchy of like this other teenage boy is your zone leader, and then this is your area leader, and then you have the region leader, and then the mission president, and the mission president will scold you for doodling something in your notebook while you're supposed to be paying attention during scripture study and make you feel terrible. And like, to me, the more experiences I had in that hierarchy, the more I was like, this doesn't feel like God's love. This feels like men playing dress up and shouting at each other. um, and that started to kind of put the emotional chinks in it that then became kind of more intellectual and then very deeply personal wedges between myself and Mormonism.
Yeah, and I mean, thinking on your childhood, I mean, something that comes up a lot in M to WTF, which, by the way, people can listen to on Audible. You can listen to that if you've got an Audible account. It's available, and I certainly urge that you do. But what one of the themes was in terms of you trying to express your gender and to tell people the truth was to have like this humor and this game where it's like, hey, why don't we have a prank where I dress up as a woman? And it kept that was always the punchline to any game, any prank was ultimately you being you. And a lot of this happened with your childhood friend Chase. And I want to know, have you had any contact with Chase? Because this feels like a thread that was unanswered. It's like since transitioning, have you two got in contact?
Oh gosh, I mean, I had a big cross country move when I was 11, so I moved from Southern California to New Jersey. I think I may only still be in touch with like one person that I know from elementary school. So Chase, if you're out there, this is why that was always like the prank that I was proposing. Sorry about having a one track mind. It's just that there was a deep misalignment between my brain and my body, and I didn't know how to deal with that. But yeah, obviously, like I've reconnected with friends from high school or that kind of thing. I mean, the annoying and sometimes exhausting thing about transition is it forces you to realize how many people you actually know and interact with in your life. I transitioned in 2012, and like there are still cousins that I like haven't seen since then, and I'm like, oh god, like I don't want to have to like show up to a reunion or a funeral sometime and like do that again. It's been years since I've I guess it can feel sometimes exhausting to reconnect because the initial period of coming out just feels relentlessly repetitive, like having the same conversation with a gazillion different friends and family members.
Yeah, yeah. I recall that you spoke a lot about this in the audiobook with immense humor as well. Everything traumatic and difficult it is with humor, and yeah, I think what one of the most important things that you said as well is, unfortunately, like there are a number of people and comedians like laughing at trans people, trying to make trans people like the kind of butt of the joke, but really, like you said, laugh with us, not at us, because there's so much kind of humor in terms of the awkwardness in having this second puberty, and there's so much joy to be experienced. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the thesis of M to WTF, which is my inscrutably titled audio memoir about transition, which is like transition is funny. And there's a stereotype that trans people are humorless, largely because trans cultural critics have had to do a lot of work of kind of critiquing this very kind of mean 90s era like transphobic comedy that's still somehow in vogue today. But like behind closed doors or like within the community, trans people think it's all like really funny. Like it's hilarious. Like it is really weird to in your mid 20s do puberty again, like just after having finished it the first time. It's a very bizarre life experience. It puts you in all sorts of awkward situations, which you can listen more about in the book, for sure. But like, you have to laugh at it, and you laugh at it with each other. I mean, and I think that like the mistake is cis comedians or cisgender comedians sometimes think, oh, well, because I can't do the insult, that means I can't joke about it at all. And I'm like, no, you just have to like be smart and be creative. I think you can make jokes about a community you're not a part of. Um, I just think you have to do it really intelligently. Like there are comedians who I think like have um, examples of both like in their work, like Louis CK, before everything happened with him, had this I thought really interesting trans joke where he sort of riffed about trans people for a second, and then he was like, god, but don't you admire that they know what the hell is wrong with them? Like I wish I knew what was wrong with me. I wish that I could just like wake up and be like, oh, I need to like put on a dress and everything will be fine. Like, how amazing would that be if that could like solve my problems? And I was like, this is an example of a really like funny joke about trans people that finds the concept mildly amusing, but that isn't making the joke of like trans people are gross or unattractive or delusional losers. And then, I think you can find examples of like this same comedian making sloppier jokes on the subject that don't kind of have that finesse and nuance. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get too roped into the comedy world, but that's sort of my feeling on it. And what I wanted to accomplish with M to WTF was to say, like, we can make light of this, and we should make light of this. And I mean, part of my frustration as like a trans author is, in a bid for acceptance and respectability, we've often had to present these very like sober, clean cut narratives because they're easily digestible by a mainstream audience. Part of what I think is happening now with trans and queer storytelling more generally is we're like, well, we can continue sanitizing everything for acceptance that will always be held hostage to us by right wing politicians, or we can just like be ourselves and like talk like we want to talk about our experiences, and invite people in that way instead of saying like, look at me, I'm just like a good little transsexual who's never had like any weird life experiences ever, and I just wish to be accepted. Won't you please admit me to the halls of power? I think, I don't know, you've got to invoke the Joker again. Be a little Joker pilled about it. You've got to, yeah, you've got to have a little bit of an anarchic instinct, I think.
Yeah, I think anyone really trying to claim that they haven't had any weird life experiences is just not really being authentic. And as you're saying, and I think with any, not just fiction, but with any life, really being authentic and being true to yourself, whether it's messy, whether it's palatable or not. I mean, that seems to be the way to be. But I mean, it certainly sounds like as well. I mean, fiction writers, we have enough pressures as it is, but it sounds like, being a trans woman, you are under even closer scrutiny. It's like, oh, so you've got all the regular pressure, and now we're just going to top it up with some more pressure for you to deal with and some more scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, I think that may be largely why I've avoided having trans characters in my fiction. You know, I've written so much memoir, like, memoir is often kind of the ticket into publishing for many trans people because it's like, if you're a talented writer, like, and you're trans, a lot of what people want to hear from you like is your own story. And so you kind of have to use that as your foot in the door before you get to do something wild and zany like Patricia wants to cuddle. Like, I know so many people recently who have taken that turn of like, oh, I'll write online about my experience, or I'll write a memoir, and then I'll finally get to do like the thing, the thing I want to do. And so I think now that I'm writing fiction, I'm kind of like, well, I'll have queer cisgender characters in here, and I think you can still see quite a lot of like trans thematics in something like Patricia, but I'm not gonna box myself into like the representational expectation of like, I am gonna write a fiction, works of fiction with trans protagonists or trans characters. I reserve the right to eventually, but for now, I'm kind of having fun deviating from my own experiences while still incorporating them.
And in terms of your writing, I'm wondering, what does your writing routine look like? And how many projects do you work on at one time?
My writing routine is absolute chaos, and I would describe it as binge writing, followed by periods that I refer to as brain rinsing. So I will sit down and write something like Patricia in 3 months, and then I will play Dark Souls for like 2 months and not look at words because I did all that, and that's been my routine always. I think I can be like a little manic about it, but part of, I think, Yeah, I'm not going to be one of those authors who delivers the like, first I wake up at 7 and have my first cup of coffee and get down 500 words and go for a stroll before returning to my like I think for me, once I get going and I get to the point where it's exactly in my head how I want it to look, which one of the things I feel lucky about in my process is that tends to happen like pretty early. Then the unlucky part happens, which is I feel like I can't stop until it's down because I'm just mad that it's not on the paper yet. It's like I wish I could just like extract it from my brain or like roll ink through the grooves of my brain and then like press it against paper and be done with it. Yeah, I find writing almost annoying. So I have just like out, get it all out, rinse the brain, edit, rinse the brain, read the first pass pages, and then rinse. Generally, only one book going at a time, just because I still work, in publishing, online publishing is a day job. So it's hard to really have multiple irons in the fire. But I'll typically start something while the last book is in later stages of edits, just because that's when the brain rinsing starts to give way to some free time.
So, like when you say brain rinse, are you talking about staying completely away from any ideas, any concepts, or anything like that? Just totally immersing in things that could inspire you, but no thinking about writing at all.
Yeah, I tabula rasa is the motto. I don't read during that period. I don't like to like even consume a lot of fiction in the space I'm thinking about writing next during that period. I feel like I am waiting for some kind of inspiration in that period, and the only way that I can let it in is by doing something that is just pure process, which is
Mm-hmm.
like playing a video game where I kill the boss and then I level up and then I go kill the next boss. It's all just like the same inputs over and over again for hours. And for some reason, somewhere in the middle of the brain rinsing, you get an idea like, what if a Sasquatch showed up on The Bachelor?
I wish I could brain rinse then because I, I'm 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 not a binge writer, but once I latch onto an idea, I'm kind of like you. I want to finish it. I want to get it out, and I'll work through a first draft. I just recently did one. It sucks, but that comes with the territory. I'm gonna start another project. So, but during the day, I can't write every day. I just can't do it. I impossible for me. Day job, things like that. So I find myself periodically going through like a 2-3 week period where I don't write at all, but the ideas won't stop coming. They just they attack. It's get away. And so I just after years of this, I just let it go. But I'd love to have like a brain rinse. Is that? I mean, it sounds like something you can like brain rinse. In a bottle now. And I'm like,
Yeah.
shit. I need because sometimes just to clear the slate to get all it's be like clear to cache. And you
Well,
have that ability to do that. That's I'm very I envy that.
well, I envy you. I think this may be a grass greener situation because around month 2 of replaying Elden Ring, I'm like, God, I wish I had another idea. Like I
Well,
wish I had the problem of having too many ideas sometimes. So yeah, I don't know. Everybody's
man,
brain works so differently in this world. It's fascinating.
I didn't say they were good ideas, but not too good ideas. It's the idea to me. I think ideas are almost like a dime a dozen. You have to be able to put a character with a story with it, so you can come up with man. What if this happened? And it's like, well, that ain't gonna work, So you know, but just have that clean slate. That would be man, just for a little while. just for a little while. I could have that for like a day or two. That'd be cool.
Yeah, watch a Yule log, like, no, for me, like, I don't know, I still have to be doing something that's like engaging in some way, but
Mm-hmm.
not tapping into the part of me that's requiring language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like there's a hard cap. I have a quota on the number of words I can process in any given day.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have that too, because there does seem to be a kind of law of diminishing returns. So I might be able to write a certain amount of words and it's flowing and it's going quite well. But once I hit whatever the threshold is for that day, they're just no good, or they're just coming so slowly, or my brain has decided, like, no, we're done. We're going to be distracted by other things. So that's probably the point where, as you suggest, well, you don't suggest, but you said it's part of your life. We load up Dark Souls. It's like let's just do that, because I haven't played a video game for a while, but this probably wasn't the takeaway that I was meant to come to. But now I'm just like, damn, maybe I need to play video games this afternoon because it's been too long.
Yeah, just like boot up a Nintendo Switch or an SNES or something. Just like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it is very humbling work because, like you said, I think realistically, I probably have 1,000 really high quality words in me on any given day. And a book is like 70,000 words, and you kind of want to be able to like be done with it, but you have to be on day one of 70 and be like, well, that's as good as it's going to get for today, even though this looks like a humiliatingly small amount of text on the page. I guess I will obscenely reward myself for what looks like very little effort, Yeah, you have to kind of overcome how silly it feels and acknowledge that it is like actual labor. Like, it's very hard for people who don't write. It's almost mystical, like what writers are able to accomplish. Like, you're able to look at a page and put something on it, which is not a skill most people have.
Yeah, and getting deeper into the minutiae, I mean, when you have an idea and you start writing, how much of an outline or a plan or lack thereof is there? And then once you finish the first draft, how many drafts would you say that you go through?
Yeah, so this differs with nonfiction versus fiction. You still kind of have to put something like Real Queer America, my first traditional book, into like an act structure. But I think that's about as much as I often do is I'll break out a 3-act structure or a 5-act structure or something, and then I'll fill it in. And I like the filling it in to feel fairly freeform. I don't really want to outline or save the cat or anything. I just kind of want to have in my mind a preconceived idea of where it's going to go and when it's going to go and when certain turns are going to occur, and then just be more freeform from there. Um, Patricia Wants to Cuddle went through one larger structural draft. Like many pieces of horror fiction, there comes a point at which characters in danger split up into groups. And in the original draft, the pairings that split up were different. So I had to rewrite it, keeping much of the same action because I liked what happened to each of these splintered parties, but acknowledging and incorporating that different characters were now involved in the events happening on each side of this Pacific Northwest mountain. So yeah, that was one big structural edit, and then finessing from there. My forthcoming book, uh, editing was quite intensive because I originally wrote it in a more kind of like mixed media, almost found footage kind of way. And then we decided to make it kind of more straightforward and legible. So that was quite a lot of rewriting and and I think like interestingly challenging experience for me. I'm glad I went through that.
Yeah, so at the moment, you've got Patricia Wants to Cuddle. You have forthcoming next year, I believe, Roland Rogers Isn't Dead Yet, which is an incredible title. And I'm hoping that in the second hour we can possibly find out a bit more about that one. But I'm wondering, are there any other novels that you have that are kind of ready to go and are complete, or that are at various stages in the process? Like, what else have you done?
I'm just emerging from brain rinsing now. I realize I'm using this very ridiculous term in a
I
really
love the
serious
term. It's
way.
new to us, but I want to incorporate it now.
I want to buy it.
You wanna-
Yeah, I mean, I wish that we could like. I wish that lobotomies were like reversible. Like I wish I could lobotomize myself and then like undo it when I needed to start writing again. So yeah, I'm in the early stages of the next one. I am a little superstitious about uh, details this early. I will say it has cosmic and apocalyptic elements to it. Like I sort of have this problem where I start writing things and I think they're going to be normal. Like Patricia Wants to Cuddle wasn't going to have a Sasquatch in it. And in my next book, the plot, oh, it comes out later this year, by the way. So sooner than we think. But the plot description is out there. So it's not spoiling anything to say that one of the characters is a ghost. Um, that character wasn't originally going to be a ghost, and then he became a ghost when I started writing. So I have a problem where I'm like, I'm going to write a really normal commercial book. And then I'm like, but what if? And then that's what gets me excited about it. So for my next one, I've sort of decided like, I'm going to stop fighting the instinct and start out weird and see where that gets me. Maybe it'll be bad. Maybe it's good for me to have the tension of starting out normal and trying to incorporate the weird, but I'm sort of in a like throwing caution to the wind mood with the next one. Who knows how many of these things one gets to write in a life, so I might as well swing for the fences once.
I completely relate to what you say about trying to write something commercial and normal, for want of a better word, and then it just rapidly descends into anything but. I mean, a few months ago, I started trying to write a commercial thriller because I thought everything I write is a bit weird, it's a bit darkly comic, but only a few chapters into mapping this out, I realized that there would be a calisthenics sex cult. And at that point, it's like, well, commerciality has gone right out the window, but I'm kind of in love with where this is going. So I just have to see what happens. But yeah, I think at this point, I won't ever write anything commercial. And that's okay. It keeps things interesting. And it makes it more fun for me in the writing. And I think, as creators, we should find joy in creating, in the pursuit of the writing. And if you enjoy the process anyway, then whatever happens, you've kind of won.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. maybe some people are able to kind of switch it off and churn something out that's a little more marketable. But I guess, yeah, I have the same problem. Like, I will privately complain to my agent. I'll be like, I wish I could just like, my next book is it's a romantic comedy, I suppose, on its surface. And I'd be like, to my agent, I'd be like, I wish I could have written this where like he wasn't dead. I was like, why did I have to make him dead? And she's like, Samantha, like, I don't think you're interested enough in it to write it if there isn't something weird or messed up going on in it. And sadly, like, I feel like if you're not interested in it, it's almost impossible to do it in any sort of way that brings you pleasure at all. Like it would, to me, feel like cleaning toilets, like to write something that like didn't feel like it was letting some of my deranged side out. Yeah, I totally relate. That's okay. I'll make the mortgage, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, having a romance where the love interest is dead, it worked out okay for the movie Ghost. So there you go. There might be commerciality after all.
Well, the ghost thing is just the first layer of the weirdness.
Yeah,
There's something, I would say, like calisthenic sex cult level of strange
yes.
about going on in Roland, that I won't spoil, but I will hint at. Yeah, like that is there's an escalation, there's a ratcheting up. You're like, okay, he's dead, and what if this was how he
Mm,
experienced, yeah, being dead? What if this was how he could relate to other people? What if this was the mechanism through which he could move? And it becomes strange, stranger than your average ghost story, even. But I think readers want that. I don't know, or at least judging from the reaction to Patricia, which I was so gratified by. Like, I feel like people want to be shaken up a little bit, uh, in the movies too. Like if everyone has seen so much media that like what breaks through is something that like really arrests your attention and makes you think about story in a different way. Um, so yeah, I'm just trying to break through all that desensitization and shake people and see if a Sasquatch makes them feel something.
yeah. Well, I can tell you that I certainly want to read Roland Rogers Isn't Dead Yet, and as soon as it is available, I am going to do so. And if you are up for it, I also want to talk to you about it once I've read it as well. Because yeah, everything I've read by you thus far, I have loved. So I am so excited, and
Hmm.
what great news to find out that it's coming out later this year. I don't even have to wait till 2025.
In fact, I'll send you a paperback galley, which I think I just came the other day. So
Wow,
uh,
I do not have
you
to
don't even have
wait
to wait
long at
until later this
all.
Yeah.
year.
All right.
You'll just have to look past the typos in the galley, and
Of course.
yeah.
Of course. And I mean, as you said before, this is going to be a tenuous segue. Bob is used to this, but I mean, you made an analogy about how you didn't want to be just kind of cleaning toilets, and one of your missions, I believe, throughout your work is actually to spread awareness of women's bathrooms and a very serious issue of hovering. So you've mentioned it in most of your nonfiction. I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about hovering, the dangers of it, the solutions for people who are listening.
Yeah, the public service announcement portion of the program. So yeah, I mean, obviously for uh I mean, as a child, I guess you're often taken into the women's bathroom by your mother regardless, but you don't really pay attention necessarily to the cleanliness of the bathrooms as a kid. So, yeah, I mean, for the first, you know, 23 years of my life, I used men's restrooms. And I think some naive part of me thought, oh, well, after transition, my public restroom experiences will probably be cleaner. And then you come to find out that cisgender women, instead of sitting on public toilets for fear of like germs, I suppose, will like hover over or occasionally, and this terrifies me, like on the toilet seat and just kind of hope, you know? Which is an interesting reversal of the dynamic in many single family homes where it's always the cisgender men who are being scolded for their aim. Like, little do they know that, like, when their wives go to the bathroom at the mall, they're just like a sprinkler, like spraying over like the entire toilet and the floor. So I was like absolutely horrified enough to like devote, I think, a paragraph of Real Queer America and like an entire chapter of M to WTF to this practice because you do not get like gonorrhea from a toilet seat, you know, like so I do not hover. I will use toilet seat covers if they are available. Sometimes if it seems dire, I will make one of those little bird-like nests of toilet paper in lieu of a toilet seat cover. But the hovering thing is absolutely unhinged behavior that to me is like the precursor to the downfall of like civilization. Like if we can't even like building sewers and plumbing was how like we escaped all of this. And then and then we just like don't even use that infrastructure properly. It's like what did we even what did we even climb out of the primordial soup for if like we're not going to sit on toilets?